Hi, and welcome to our exec overview of our Becoming Cloud Native video series, What to Do When Your Company Wasn't Born in the Cloud. My name is Daniel Goosen. I'm the Chief Architect of Level Up Technology, and thank you in advance so much for checking this out. In the very first place, it's probably important to talk about what most companies do given that they weren't born in the cloud, statistically speaking. And these numbers help us form ratios and are a pretty good thought exercise when we consider some of the ramifications of, first of all, becoming cloud native ourselves and also competing with companies that were actually born in the cloud. I think both things are important to talk about. So the pro tips that we'll be walking through in this video, we've accumulated as architects over the last decade plus of working in larger DevOps and cloud environments. The first pro tip is really in recognizing the opportunity to change and to change now. So when we look at the state of DevOps and cloud across multiple percentages and larger industry surveys, we see probably inside of these numbers, really, first of all, that if we're having challenges with automation and cloud adoption, we're in really good company. And secondly, I would say that these numbers really tell us that there's a great opportunity to go faster and get more done than we ever have. The right-hand number, I think, is especially telling because it really should validate that everybody's headed toward the cloud, and it's really just a question of how we're all going to get there. The second pro tip is in recognizing that becoming cloud native really means becoming DevOps. So we could do cloud without DevOps, and we could do DevOps without cloud, but there's probably not a great value to doing that for our organization. And so as far as building a learning culture goes, we want to stay ready so that we don't have to get ready. We want to learn how to open the parachute when we're on the ground, safe and sound, and then go out and execute on the mission. The third pro tip is really in recognizing the value of automation and how much it means to organizations. So there's a large Stack Overflow survey that was released this year. About 65,000 developers actually contributed to it and acknowledged that DevOps is pretty important. Over 80%, or actually I should say almost 80%, found that it was at least somewhat important, and about half actually felt that it was extremely important. So with that said, though, a 2018 McKinsey survey would caution us that a lot of digital transformations don't do the transformation part so well, and only 16% of orgs actually found that to be sustainable. To me, this is really revealing in that it's not so much about our ideas as leaders, it's about our execution. And so 16% tells us that there's a lot to do. And once again, the former survey really tells us that there's a great opportunity if we can, seize the moment. The fourth pro tip is really in recognizing that developer self-service, when we can't automate, is really the best second approach, right? Plan B. And so I think we've all seen, especially those of us who've had any infrastructure responsibilities, that it used to be the case that when we would build things, in general, our users or developers would end up consuming them. That's no longer really the case. In a lot of organizations, developers are really the new kingmakers. And we should recognize that they are going to influence or even outright make IT decisions going forward. And it's really important for us to be in a position where we're supporting that and helping them explain their vision and express to us what it is that they want before we actually start building anything. The fifth pro tip is in understanding that while we've all seen at this point the value of continuous integration and continuous deployment, we should also see the opportunity to view almost everything that we do as being process driven or pipeline driven, right? And so the lean movements, build, measure, learn, that feedback loop, that works really in a variety of ways. And when we think about problem sets as being people, process, or technology, in terms of processes, our processes usually should be subject to some kind of feedback to tell us how we're doing. And in general, our tools should enforce our processes rather than having our processes constraining our tools. And so we want, as much as possible to create these nice, easy one-way streets for our users and our own teams to be able to go down where it's very difficult to get lost. You generally know, the end destination that you have in mind. The next tip is something that comes from a fairly canonical title and one that I've referenced over the last several years, letting the platform do the hard stuff, really recognizing that as we've been talking about in terms of automation and self-service, we really should be asking the platform that we're building from a cloud native perspective to do a lot of the heavy lifting around reliability, around scalability and so forth. We want to value horizontal scale as opposed to vertical scale in our environments. We want to containerize. We want to go serverless if we can. We want to realize that network's not actually an infinite resource and not over budget or under budget, depending on the perspective that we have on a given challenge from a network throughput perspective, latency perspective, and so forth. And in the cloud, we want to look for, once again, the opportunities to work with the automation in terms of API frameworks, in terms of other things, to our advantage, right? The natural or built-in abilities that our cloud or clouds have in a multi-cloud context, and really, take advantage of those and expect that the hard part will be done by the platform, generally speaking, anytime that it becomes a routine thing, right? Especially. The seventh tip is around recognizing that in terms of containers, for those of us who may be a little bit earlier in our containerization journeys, it's not just containerizing that we need to think about. It really is about also looking for ways to orchestrate, especially in microservices context. And the screenshot here is from Sysdig, and it should start to tell us a little bit about why we need to orchestrate, because the lifespan of containers in most modern environments is very small. It's a very short lifespan. Sometimes, less than a week it's pretty normal to have containers live for less than a week. So the idea that, if anybody ever views containers as being kind of an end goal, it's really unlikely to be, because for a variety of reasons, just the way that a typical Docker type container works, it's fairly immutable. You have to build on top of it, and so it's going to be ripped and replaced pretty frequently. And so in terms of thinking about orchestration, then what we should be looking to do is find something that is enterprise grade, that is based on Kubernetes, that can support any cloud or every cloud, depending on our scale and reach. And it also provides a variety of other features that are certainly just going to be important, given that there is going to be this very dynamic environment that's going to be constantly changing for everyone. The next tip is in understanding, as we said at the top of this, that we know that there's tech debt. We know that there's going to be legacy in our environments because we weren't actually born in the cloud. And so what do we do then? Red Hat has a pretty good book as a starting point for recognizing, the path to cloud native applications and some of the things that we can do with our legacy applications in terms of trying to decompose them a little bit, breaking up more monolithic architectures over a period of time, but also just recognizing anything that we do around containerization as a starting point starts to open doors for us. And we should be looking for as many opportunities as we can to move more and more things into that cloud native picture, including any tech debt, legacy apps that we may continue to have for a period of time. The ninth tip is in understanding that the build versus buy question is usually not actually the reality. The reality is usually build versus buy versus business as usual. And so this is quite an eye chart, and I'm certainly not expecting anybody to even really be able to see what's inside of it in this screen here. But this is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's landscape, and there are over 1,300 products defined here, and nobody knows all of them. And there's not a single product on this list or anywhere else that's going to solve all of our problems. And so really the key word is integration. And we really should be looking, in my opinion, from a leadership perspective, at the efforts that are generally going to make us more competitive in the marketplace versus everything else, and really trying to delegate as much as we can, whether that's a delegation of expertise or actually into a SaaS platform, the things that really, don't add a lot of value for us and allow the team to really focus on building the future of the organization and the company at large. The 10th and final tip is really recognizing that in order to go faster, we need to approach this from a team and an organization, and even perhaps a partner driven approach in terms of looking at OEMs that can help us, in terms of consulting firms like Level Up, which should be able to help as well, in recognizing that the overall transformative process that we're going through and becoming cloud native. If we look at things like the AWS Cloud Transformation Maturity Model, that's also, you know, the other eye chart in this video, there's a lot to this. There's a much more than one cloud engineer or DevOps engineer or anything else that, you know, any other title that we would give them, one person is really going to be able to accomplish on their own. This requires a lot of top-down and bottom-up meeting together. It will happen over a period of months or even years in terms of bringing, you know, even 90%, 95% of what we're doing into a fully cloud native picture. But we can go very quickly in getting started, get some quick wins on the board, and then really bring in larger and larger groups as we've proven it out and we continue to improve it in the process. So just in terms of looking at, I think it's important to be able to say that, you know, we can talk about ideas all day, but at some point we have to look at some products in the marketplace that can really help us. Level Up is a Red Hat partner. And so one of the ways that we would try to frame the conversation as far as getting started would be to recognize that it usually happens in 3 steps. And the automation picture, the Kubernetes platform as a service picture being the second step, and the third big step being middleware. So middleware actually would fit in most diagrams like in the middle, I guess, pun intended, no pun intended. But in terms of where we usually have the realization, the epiphany about that is usually sometime after we've actually started to implement platform as a service and Kubernetes-based approaches in our environment. And so these solutions generally can put our ideas into practice. And in terms of thinking about Ansible, thinking about Kubernetes and specifically the OpenShift container platform, thinking about the Red Hat application services middleware stack, these are well-defined, well-established enterprise-grade solutions that really can get us going where we want to very, very quickly, especially relative to a lot of the competition in the marketplace today. So as far as next steps, if you are interested, we would love to talk to you about evaluating an Ansible or OpenShift lab in your own environment. We're also very available to work on workshops or anything like that in the emerging tech portfolio that Red Hat has. And finally, we would be delighted to schedule some type of proof of concept, once again, in your environment as well. We also have a related ebook that I would invite you to download, and thank you very much for your time today.